Hi everybody and welcome to Fiddlesticks and Stitches. I'm Fiddle. Today's project is a Halloween special that I am calling Laundry Day. As always, the link to the scavenger hunt will be in the description box, and if you do decide to make this piece, please put it down in the comment section. I would love to see them. This piece had originally started with just an empty cauldron and has grown into this cute little miniature. After getting the ideas and a rough sketch down, I was ready to start. I needed to find a base first, and I decided to use a plastic ice cream container lid. It's a decently tough plastic, and I had no worries of it holding up. After I found the lid, it was time to decide on where I wanted my terrain to go and how I wanted it. I used a drill to drill 3 holes, one for each of the posts and one for the cauldron hook. I knew that I wanted the pit to be inset, so I cut out the circle in the center. And you can put logs in it if you want to. I didn't because I'm doing laundry in the cauldron, so there's no need for the heat. The terrain, I used a yoga mat that I just cut bits off of. I've used it in quite a few projects, and more to come, I'm sure. To create the fire pit, I took the piece of plastic that I had cut off of the lid and traced it on the yoga mat, making one piece a negative and one piece a positive, gradually getting bigger until you meet the bottom of the plastic container. Now onto the cauldron. For this, I used a soccer ball that came in 2 pieces and is hollow inside. It reminds me of an Easter egg. I believe you can get them at party supply stores. The first thing that I needed to do was draw the outline for the opening at the top of the cauldron. I used my paint marker to draw the lines and a box cutter to cut out the circle. And then it was on to sanding. I sanded the whole piece to make sure it had a nice tooth for the paint to stick to. Next was deciding where I was going to put the handle for the cauldron, and then I used just a simple pointy thing to make a hole on the spots where I needed them. To make the rim of the cauldron thicker, I used yoga mat and traced the circle on it and made it maybe about a quarter of an inch thick and cut it out. To get rid of the yoga mat texture, I used my scissors and just trimmed off the slightest little layer. And I used E6000 to glue it to the top. Set it aside to dry, and then we're going to turn our attention to the terrain on the upper half of the base. For this part, I just made tiny stones out of the mat. And for the first one, I actually put string in between the layers. It looks like roots, and it gives a lot of texture to the base and a little bit more detail. If you haven't already, now would be a good time to put your posts in. As you can see, I've done mine, and make sure everything is glued down tight. To give my piece a uniform look, I took some watered down glue and tissue and just put it all over the base. Allowing for drying time, I believe I added 3 layers. Now that our base is covered, we're going to turn our attention to the cauldron. There's a lot of pores in the yoga mat, so I wanted to fill those in. And the best way I found to do this was with wood glue. Now onto the witch's hat while that's drying. For this, I used a faux leather and just cut out a big circle, and then I cut out a cone shape. You can find patterns online or you can just draw them out yourself. I made mine up as I went along, although I had a general direction of what I wanted it to be. I knew that I wanted a little bit of a bend in the hat, like it's kind of fallen over. To get that look, I wanted my edges to meet, and I was going to be using needle and thread to sew them. I made 2 nips in the side that was going to be sewn, so that way I can overlap and bend it just a little bit. Before I started sewing, I took a straight pin and poked my holes so I knew where I wanted them to be, and then I just stitched it in a crisscross pattern. After getting the stitches in, I made sure to adjust them and put them where I wanted them. I tacked them down with super glue. For the brim of the hat, trace the top part of the hat onto the base and then cut it like a pizza. Be sure to leave the tabs. Do not cut the full circle out. You need them to tack inside of the hat. When you do this, start with the seam of the stitches in the hat first so it flattens it out a little bit better. And keep going until you work your way all the way around and all tabs are glued down. I am missing a bit of footage finishing the hat off, as all I did was took a thin strip and put it around the base of the hat. I painted it with the shimmery purple paint that I'll be using later. After finishing the hat, I started on the mushrooms by rolling out the stems, which was just a snake of clay that I cut into shorter bits and bent. For the caps, I just took pinches of clay and using my thumb as a flat edge for one end and squeezing and twisting in the other hand. I was able to get a nice pointy shape. Some of them I made shallower than others just to give a little bit of variation. I also made an indent in the base of all of the mushrooms so I can glue the stems in. To make the snail, I rolled out a thicker, longer snake of clay for the body, and then I split one end to make its eyes. For the shell of the snail, I used a lid to roll out a big snake of clay and just coil it around itself. I decided that I wanted to add a foot to, so I just did that by taking the lid and mashing out a ball of clay until it was thin enough to suit the body proportions. Using something sharp, I cut the excess off of the clay and blended the edges. To attach the shell, I used the same process. Allow for drying time, and then it's on to color. I used Crayola markers to do my coloring. For the mushrooms, I used the same coloring techniques. To give the mushrooms and snail more detail, I used a gold-colored acrylic paint and the shimmery eyeshadow that I had talked about before. The next part of the project comes with a warning. I use silica gel packs and they are toxic. There is an alternative. You can use dehydrated water beads. I have used them in the past and they work just as well. After stuffing the cauldron and cut a clear plastic circle that would fit inside, stuffed the stuffing in it and the clear plastic over it. After that, I separated a few of the silica beads and colored them with markers and a little bit of shimmery powder. To make some sort of liquid looking stuff in the bottom of the cauldron, I took the shimmery powder and some E6000 and mixed it together really well and just put a thin layer over top of the plastic that we put in the cauldron. Now it's time to add the bubbles. For the first one, I put so many bubbles you couldn't even see any of the purple E6000 liquid looking stuff. So for the second one, I didn't put as many and I chose selectively where I put them. My favorite part is the bubbles going down the side. And that brings us to the next part of the project where we are going to be making the bottles. For these, I used electrical butt connectors. To make a bottle stopper, I used a little piece of dowel and E6000. I made 3 bottles for this project. The first one I used E6000 and the shimmery powder. For the second one I used the gold paint. And for third I used baking soda. To seal up the bottom half of the bottles I used a dab of just plain E6000 and let them dry. The next piece in the project will be the spoon. If you don't want to carve a spoon or you have a good idea for a spoon, you can go ahead and do that. I carved mine out of just a single piece of balsa wood. First, I used the box cutter to knock down the main shape. To get into the smaller spaces, I moved on to using my Dremel. And I did fine finishing with a nail file. And since I already have my wood tools out, I went ahead and made the broomstick as well. For it, I didn't really have a design or a pattern in mind. I just shaved some spots here and there. For the head of the broom, I knew exactly what I was doing. Unfortunately, I have missed a bit of footage here. I laid a strip of glue down the wax paper and laid strips of the string on top of it and then put a layer of glue over top of that so that way they were all stuck together. After it dried, I came back with a cat brush and combed it out. This is also a technique that I used in one of my earlier tutorials where we were making the cold porcelain clay dolls. Also off camera, I finished the handle of the broom by adding a leather covered button to the top of it and coloring it brown. After brushing all of the string out, I pulled it off the paper and wrapped it around the handle of the broom. And I held everything together with a little bit of super glue. Now we need to pull out our needle and thread and our tiny swatch of fabric because we're going to be making the bloomers. I just cut a triangle shape out and attached the 3 tabs to the center back and used a little bit of liquid stitch to hold it all together and went back in with needle and thread and sewed it together. I figured out that this liquid stitch when it dries like it's still wet, so it's shiny, and I thought it kind of made the underwear look like they just came out of the laundry. And I thought it was just the neatest detail. I didn't realize it until way after I had done the first pair, which are the pink ones in the photos. Now that our bottles have had time to dry, it's time to put the labels on. Take a tiny piece of tape on random sides. I either cut it or I tore it, and use super glue to hold it down because this tape did not like to stick to the rubber. And with the bottles being done, we are almost finished with this project. For the very last part, we have to finish our base. We've got to make it look nice. Right now it's pretty plain and not much detail. For this, I used brown paint, black paint, and white paint. With the special ingredient baking soda, I only added this to the brown paint to give it more of a gritty look. Okay, for the last bit of detail, I added grass. I had trimmed a lot off of the edges of the broom, so I saved all the little bitty scraps and used a green marker to color them. Now it's time to put it all together. And with that, our project is complete. Thank you so much if you made it this far. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. See you next time.